Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Azure MythBusters. I'm Glen Small from the FastTrack for Azure team.
And I'm Will Eastbury, also from the FastTrack for Azure team.
And in this episode, we're going to be looking at whether you really do need access to the infrastructure when moving to the cloud. So Will, this is something that we see customers asking for quite a lot in their original designs. I have to have access to the infrastructure when I move my project to Azure. So let's scratch off a layer there and dig into that.
Okay, yeah, so the first question we would tend to ask is simply, do you really need to do it that way? Yeah. Why do you actually need to have access to the infrastructure in the first place? Yeah. And then we'll have to drill into a couple of levels of why normally. So the first one we'll hit with and usually comes back with because that's how we've always done it.
Absolutely, familiarity. This is what we do on-prem, we're used to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we'll kind of drill into that in a little bit more depth again. Mm-hmm. So we'll go in with another why. Mm-hmm. And then normally we'll get an awkward pause. Yeah, with very little stated objectives there. And what will happen next is I'll just, because that's what we've always done.
Exactly.
Yeah. Rarely we do here because it'll only run in IaaS.
Yeah, and there are some cases where it really will only work on a virtual machine.
Yeah, yes. Absolutely. And then we hear an apples to oranges comparison of because IaaS is cheaper.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So that's the next myth we have to kick in and start to debunk, right?
Yeah.
So we know that IaaS isn't necessarily cheaper. Yeah, when you compare apples with apples, actually PaaS services can tend to stack up pretty well.
Yes, and it really comes down to going into some of those requirements and what are you trying to achieve so you can understand that in a better detail.
Yeah, absolutely. And in the world we're talking to today, the developer community, the developer advocacy community, you're going to have access to the source code for the application. Yes. More than likely. You might have a component somewhere, but you're more than likely going to have access to the source. And in that case, it's actually relatively easy to make changes to the application or to re-architect it, carve pieces out, and make it run in PaaS services or in serverless or modern container environments. All of those things can be done rather than just, hey, we need access to the infrastructure, let's just lift it and shift it.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah. The second piece is in that conversation is actually what do people forget about? Yeah, so we see a few things that people forget about, and this is one we've kind of referenced in some of the prior sessions, but deploying two of everything because I need HA.
Absolutely. Azure isn't necessarily magical. If you are deploying to infrastructure as a service, you've got to account for your high availability needs, your disaster recovery needs.
Yeah, absolutely. Exactly. So we start seeing people deploying infrastructure clusters to get to high availability. They put two of them together, 2 boxes with shared storage somewhere, and then they've just doubled the cost. Yeah. They've doubled the cost of storage, they've doubled the cost of their infrastructure, they've also doubled the cost of their backups, which is the other thing that people don't think about. So where they need backups and bandwidth and all the other costs which come in from IaaS, which are usually packaged up in the cost of a PaaS service. Yes. If we take SQL database, for example, or app services similar, you get backups as part of that platform and you get levels of storage included in with whatever target level you choose.
And with those services, if you do choose like SQL database, if you do choose multiple deployments for additional high availability, there's an element of the network charges for synchronizing data is bundled in as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. The big gotcha, though, that people fail to think about is the patching and management side of things. So actually, it's all very well having a load of infrastructure because your application will only run on X or because you've always managed it this way, but you're also bringing across and factoring in your old management processes.
Yes.
So things like, how do I do logging? How do I do alerting? How do I actually run these backups and target these things at the cloud? You're just going to bring across your existing management processes from on-premise.
And potentially all of the problems that you have with it as well. Yes, and the cost and the people needed to do that. Yes. Yeah.
So you referred to this earlier on in terms of familiarity. So it is one of familiarity. It's I want to carry on doing things in the way that I used to do them, but I don't want to build my own data center. Yes. Yeah, I just want to buy infrastructure from somebody else. And if that's your target, in some virtual data center environments, you do see that. And that's okay, right? It's not that we're saying don't do IaaS ever.
No, absolutely.
Yeah, because it absolutely does have a place.
May be the way to go, particularly if you need a strategic deployment quickly. Yes.
Totally, yeah, exactly. What we are saying is think about your management processes if you do it. Otherwise, IaaS is probably going to work out more expensive because you're going to miss opportunities to save costs and modernize the application.
Absolutely. At least consider the options. Yes. Yeah.
Should we take a couple of minutes just to talk about what some of those magical theme options are?
Absolutely.
Cool. Okay, so think about some of the more magical cloud native approaches that we've got. The first piece, which we referred to on earlier, would have to be logging.
Yes.
Yeah. So we've got lots of services which we bundled together under the banner of Azure Monitor, and they can be used to monitor applications, can be used to monitor infrastructure, to monitor routing, network traffic, database access. All of that stuff sits underneath the Azure Monitor banner.
Yeah.
In time gone by, you want to monitor an IaaS instance, what you would used to have had to do is you'd have had to jump on and run perfmon, or you'd have been crawling through event logs, or whatever it happened to be that took your fancy at the time to go and figure out what was going on an IaaS instance.
Any one of the third-party systems which also incurs the cost
absolutely.
of infrastructure.
Yeah, exactly. And then you'd start to look at that data that comes out to do decisions on scaling. Yeah, how many instances do I need? Yeah, well, again, with PaaS services, and to an extent in IaaS with VM scale sets, auto-scaling is key there, right?
Yeah.
Don't waste resources that you don't need to pay for. And we'll touch on that actually in the next instance of the series. But yeah. A really interesting style of approach is also around provisioning throughput, not provisioning capacity.
Yes.
And if we kick on some of the services, again, SQL database is one, Cosmos DB is another.
Yes.
Functions to an extent works like this as well, where you're saying, I actually want to be charged for throughput. I don't want to be charged for the bits of the VM which I have there sitting idle.
Yeah, you're not trying to second guess how much memory or CPU do you need. You can factor in your specific use case and the data that you're working with. Let us worry about that infrastructure and how to provide the throughput that you need.
Exactly. Make it our problem.
Yes.
Make scalability the problem of Microsoft Azure. And that way, we'll make sure when you need that capacity, it's there.
Yes.
Yeah, and you can just say, I want 1,000 requests a second, 10,000 requests a second, 100,000 requests a second. And we will then provision the capacity behind that for that level of throughput, rather than having to just have this big question mark, stick your finger in there and go, feels like we need about 20 VMs.
Exactly. It makes far more sense when you're looking at the requirements. The requirement isn't, I need 6 CPUs, it's, I need this many requests per second. So it tallies much better.
Yeah, and if you take that back from the data layer into the application layer, that's where serverless platforms start to shine, right?
Absolutely.
Just build from a base of 0. If I don't consume anything, if I have no requests, I'm charged nothing. Yeah. Well, there's maybe some storage costs, but very little. And then actually, if I want 1 million requests, I'm billed 1 million times a fraction of an amount.
Makes perfect sense.
Yeah. And then lastly, you've got the fact that in Azure, the more managed side of the platforms, there is effectively no maintenance for you.
Yes.
Yeah, there's nothing to maintain because you don't, in fact, you don't even have access to the area where you would have wanted to maintain it.
And you don't need it.
Exactly. So the argument, I need access to the infrastructure, if we come right back to the myth that we're trying to bust, I need access to the infrastructure to maintain it. Well, actually, sorry, that's busted, right? No, you don't.
If you're using these services, you don't need that access. It's provided through another means.
Correct.
So it comes back to what are your requirements and looking at the options to see whether or not those requirements can be met with the options that we have in Platform as a Service.
Exactly. It's usually a circular state. So because you need access to the infrastructure is actually only usually a requirement for IaaS. So if you move to PaaS, you don't tend to then need access to maintain infrastructure that you haven't actually got.
Absolutely.
Yep. So you use a more modern approach, something like Azure Monitor, to pull that data out, and then you can get a really nice rich dash.
So there we go. Accessing the underlying infrastructure, it may be required, it is possible, but there are other options, and it's definitely worth considering what those options are when you're going through your requirements to see whether or not we can service your needs in a more effective way.